All right, welcome back everyone from lunch. And if you're just joining us now, welcome to the Sustainability of Canadian Agriculture Conference. My name is Christine Tapley and I've been a part of the planning committee here for the conference. I also work for Ducks Unlimited Canada as the Sustainable Agriculture Lead, and I'm a beef farmer here in Manitoba. I have the pleasure to be moderating this session, which is our first round of our student video competition. So I'm going to remind everyone to post your questions in the Q&A function as we listen to the presentations. You can be asking questions on the go. There's going to be 2 videos today and 3 videos tomorrow for the competition. We'll play both the videos today back to back and then open it up for questions to both Carla and Michael, who will introduce themselves in a minute here once the videos start. I'll also note that there's an opportunity again this year to vote for your favorite student presentation for the People's Choice Award. So you can do that by using the voting buttons in Zoom right after the last student presentation in tomorrow's session. And then the winner will be announced by the end of the day tomorrow. And then one last thing, there is a barley sandwich session, that's hard to say. We'll start tomorrow, or we'll start today at 3:45 p.m. So we just encourage everyone to join in on some great group discussion. Once you enter the main room, you'll be able to use the breakout room menu to move in and out of discussion topics as you like. The topics this year include greenhouse gases, soil, water, biodiversity, and holos. So some great discussion to be had, and we hope you can join us. But with that, we can jump right into the first student video.
Hi everyone, my name is Carla Navarro Molina and I just started my PhD in food science in the Department of Food and Human Nutritional Sciences at the University of Manitoba. So as you can see, there are lots of food products in the grocery store, but sometimes these products are withdrawn because of the very low demand. So this mainly happens because of the poor sensory attributes or because they do not meet the consumers' nutritional expectations. So that is why my project is going to focus on deeply understanding the consumer's demands and needs in terms of food products with the aim of developing novel food more sustainable and nutritious. By knowing the consumer's food waste and what they need is the key to reduce both food waste and loss of resources such as water, energy, as well as reducing CO2 emissions that contribute to global warming. One of the best solutions to investigate consumer choices about existing food products and perception regarding future needs is the use of social media like Twitter. This social media has been successfully used in different research projects to identify the food-related consumers' behaviors, to analyze the impact of environmental programs on society, or to study consumers' perception of different food products. So, to reach the aim of my project, I am analyzing the tweets of Twitter users in order to obtain key information more quickly than those obtained by surveys or interviews. This analysis will help me to carry out via different tools like Try My Hashtag or Google Trends so that I can know the most used terms or words to talk about a specific topic. So then I will obtain the terms. I will use a statistical software like R to retrieve the tweet's content based on those terms. This tweet's content will be cleaned, refined, and extracted using the orange tool data mining. Finally, the data will be classified and analyzed using the BuzzFeed software in order to know possible correlations between the tweet contents and consumers' needs. Therefore, one of the outcomes of my research will be the setting up and optimization of a data mining process with Twitter-based for the analysis of consumers' demand regarding food products. By doing this, I will be able to identify the major food waste for consumers with particular needs, as well as the nutritional and sensory gaps in the existing food products. These results will be the cornerstone for the development of a cereal food product, utilizing low-impact processing and local raw materials with the aim of creating novel products with lower carbon fingerprints. Thank you very much for listening and taking your time to see my video.
Hello everyone, my name is Michael Killewald, and I would like to mention some of my PhD research at the University of Manitoba, which focuses on using floral enhancements to support beneficial insects on Manitoba farmland. I feel like everyone here has had some sort of experience with insects, although most of these experiences have probably been bad. Insect pests such as grasshoppers, flea beetles, and aphids can cause economic harm to crops all across Manitoba. Traditionally, most control methods focus on using insecticides to reduce pest populations. But in other ecosystems, these pests have naturally occurring predators that keep their populations in check. These predators include ground beetles, which will eat both grasshoppers as well as flea beetles, and also syrphid flies, which when young have a ferocious appetite for aphids. Additionally, flower strips benefit bees by providing them with extra food and a safe place to overwinter, which often results in increased pollination services to adjacent crops. If we could increase abundances of these beneficial insects, then we might need to rely less on insecticides for pest control, and the additional pollination services from bees and syrphid flies may result in increased yield of pollination-dependent crops. One way to increase beneficial insect abundances is through the addition of floral strips. To install these strips, a mixture of plants are placed along the edges of crop fields. Once established, these flowers provide beneficial insects with additional food as well as a safe overwintering habitat so they can effectively reproduce. In 2019, we installed multiple flower strips along the edges of crop fields all across Manitoba. The flowers, as shown here, contained a mixture of flowers and grasses, so insects had ample resources throughout the entire summer. We found that the flower strips, as shown on the left here, contain significantly more ground beetles when compared to the control sites without flower strips, as well as the natural sites without any sort of enhancements. We found the same trends when looking at pollinators, as we found at least 2 times more bees and syrphid flies within the strip fields compared to the other treatments. We're hopeful that the increases in beneficial insect abundances will result in increased pest suppression and hopefully improved yield, though these samples are still being analyzed by my colleagues. And with that, I'll try to answer any questions that you might have. If I don't get a chance to answer your question, then feel free to send me an email, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great day.
All right, thank you both. Great job on your video. So opening now, if anybody wants to ask a question to either of our student presenters, please pop it in the Q&A and I can get to them. So maybe I'll start off. Michael, I'd start with you. Can you give me some idea? You talked about the benefits, of course, of increasing the habitat for insects that can combat pests and some of the benefits of increasing those populations. But what are the other benefits of planting those flower strips? Can you think of any other benefits to farmers or others by having that there?
So one of the benefits that I'm not exactly testing directly is sort of carbon sequestration. Just having like an area on the side of the field that just sort of has perennial plants will try to take some of the carbon out of the atmosphere and sort of put that underground. So like the keynote speaker yesterday was talking about trying to sequester carbon underground. These flower strips might be a small piece to that puzzle.
Great. I see there's another one popped up in the chat here for you. How would weather affect the outcomes of your work? Things like drought or I'm assuming flooding situations. So how is that going to impact what you're studying?
So over the last few years, we've sort of had a little bit of trouble trying to get some of these strips established. Last year with all the floods, some of these plants aren't exactly flood tolerant. So we've had to reseed some of the strips. And then the year before, it was sort of the reverse situation where we didn't have enough rain. So of course, too much rain or not enough rain makes sort of establishing these strips really hard. But also, since we have so many different fields, we can sort of see what different soil characteristics make, flower strips establish a little bit better, both in drought as well as flood situations.
So you're not immune, you're just like any other farmer. Carla, maybe I'll pass it over to you. Can you, I guess I wanted to dig in, you talked a bit about in your presentation how your work will impact the industry as a whole, or how we think about sustainable food, but can we drill down into how will that impact farmers, or how will we take those words that you've identified and think about how we make choices within agriculture?
Well, one of the objectives of my research is to, with the words that we will obtain from my analysis, social media analysis, we will be able to identify the needs of consumers. And with that, we want to develop cereal food product that aims consumers' needs. And another benefit will be to reduce the use of resources and also the CO2 emission. So I think that will be the main benefit of my research.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Michael, I think this was an addition to the previous question, thinking about the challenges associated with establishing these strips. Do you think that farmers need an incentive to invest in this, or do we need to support them to put those acres in?
It definitely would help, I think, if farmers were supported either by local or provincial governments. Just even tracking down some of these seeds, especially if you're trying to use native plants, because there's a whole push for using native plants for native species. They can be somewhat expensive. So I think if there were some support programs out there, then it might be a little bit easier for farmers to sort of overcome the barriers of putting in some of these flower strips.
Right. Back to you, Carla. So thinking about how you're mining that data, somebody, Marcus, is commenting here that sometimes people post opinions in Twitter that they agree, but they don't necessarily undertake themselves. So how can we trust the opinions that consumers express through those tweets, or know that the data that you're digging into is really meaningful?
Well, I think that is one of the limitations of the study, because we work with tweets. So some of the tweets are opinions. So we try to, by analyzing the tweets, we try to clean with the tools that we use, like Orange data mining or BuzzViewer. We try to clean those tweets and try to use the ones that are more objectives or have meaningful information for us. So I think that is one of the limitations of our work.
And then I think as a follow-up, and Emma, jump in here if I'm not understanding your question, or just add another if I missed it, but kind of building on that, thinking about how Twitter is a selective audience, is there opportunity to look at other platforms as well, or how do you make sure that that's representative? And I think that's what you were just getting into in the previous answer, but
yeah, well, the thing is that in the previous studies that use social medias, they mainly use Twitter because it's one of the social networks that is more easy to work with, because there's also Instagram
that is social media that is really used nowadays, but this one is hard to use it to analyze the information, because there's no tools that we can use to analyze Instagram.
Okay, gotcha. Michael, is cost per acre something that you looked at?
So it's not something that I personally looked at, but I know the professors that are also involved on the project do have sort of a breakdown of how much it costs per acre to install a flower strip. Unfortunately, I'm not exactly sure what that is off the top of my head.
No, that's just fine. And then another one for you, do you foresee any potential unwanted consequences by establishing the farmer strip? So yeah, can you tell us what the drawbacks might be?
So the biggest drawback is it's possible that these flower strips not only increase beneficial abundances, but also pests. Some flower strips that have been installed in like other parts of the world, instead of increasing the good insects, they just increase the bad ones. So to sort of test for this, there's another PhD student within my department that's looking at the pest side of things. So she's been collecting samples from within the flower strips as well as sort of all the surrounding areas, just so we can make sure that when we install these flower strips next to a crop field, we're only getting the good insects, not the bad ones.
Okay, perfect. This is an interesting one. Can you use dandelion as a strip?
So you could. Honestly, dandelions are one of the best early season flowers for bees, especially. They're super abundant. Most bees will readily forage on them. And early in the season, there's not very many other flowers around. So yeah, you could most certainly use dandelions as sort of like a flower strip if you wanted to.
Great. And that kind of leads into the next question. How were the flower species, well, either how were the species as part of the flower strip selected, but also how did you decide on which insect species to study?
So at least in terms of the flowers, we tried to select abundances of flowers that would bloom at different times throughout the season. So bees and other natural enemies would have flowers in the early part of the season, as well as the middle and the end as well. If insects don't have like a continuous abundance of floral resources throughout the season, then it makes their survival a little bit harder. And then at least how I chose which insects to study, I've always studied bees for about the last 5 years, and they're sort of near and dear to my heart. So obviously I had to choose those. And then I also just looked at any other insects that would attack like very common pests in Manitoba. And it seems like grasshoppers and flea beetles are one of the most common pests that people have been complaining about over the last few years.
Great. Carla, when you are doing this data mining, how can you give me some thoughts on how important the point of time is? Or I am assuming that this is when you dig in, this is a snapshot in time, but lots of things kind of change those opinions. And so, how often would this need to be repeated so that we can kind of track over time, or is it kind of a one and done exercise to see where our society is at?
Well, in our case, we are retrieving the data during the whole year and see how is the variation between the months, and we are like downloading the data. It's each week. It's like Mondays it's Monday you download the data for all that week, and for that we are using the tweets that are written in English, and we don't have like a specific region, like in a specific place, so it's the worldwide information data.
Wow. Okay, that was one of the next questions coming to you. Is there a geographical region that you were looking at specifically, but you're saying it's worldwide scan?
Yeah.
Okay. Michael, how about these species becoming weeds? I think maybe you kind of alluded to that, but maybe can you speak to that specifically?
Yeah, so at least before we installed our flower strips, we checked that the seed mixes that we were provided didn't have any sort of noxious weeds that might sort of spill over into the adjacent crop fields. And then once the flower strips are installed, sometimes farmers choose to sort of like mow the edge between the flower strip and the crop. That way there's like a little bit of a buffer between the two of them. Even if you only mow, 2 or 3 feet, that's often sufficient. And at least in terms of the flowers turning into weeds that spill over into the field, some of these flower strips have been established for the last 3 years, and I haven't seen any evidence of the flowers transitioning over into the field or in other parts other than the flower strip itself.
Okay. And do you have any idea of how much a farmer could reduce their pesticide use? It says generally speaking, so no, we don't need any hard numbers, but if they have a good diversity of beneficial insects around their fields, what could we see as a economic benefit?
So probably not the answer that you're looking for, but it depends. Sort of depends on like the pest pressure that you have on your field. Of course, it depends on the natural enemies that are sort of within the flower strip itself. And it also depends on sort of like past use of pesticides, because something that we've been seeing not only here in Manitoba, but in other parts of the world is if there's been a historic use of heavy pesticides, then it sort of takes a little bit longer to build up good populations of beneficial insects. So it really varies even from farm to farm, even within the same community. But I don't actually think that there's a hard number that you can reduce your pesticide use from. We're hoping that that's something that we can try to calculate at the end of my PhD, but as of right now, I can't exactly give you a hard number. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Carla, how would you account for the impact of individual influencers?
Well, in our case, we take into account like all the Twitter accounts, regardless of whether it comes from an influencer or not, because with the orange data mining tool, you can't specify which accounts you want to download a tweet or which you don't want to use for the downloading. So we use the whole Twitter account.
Okay. Michael here, getting into some specifics. Are the beetles preying on grasshoppers dependent upon any specific plant? Do they need a flowering species present?
So I don't think that they need a specific plant, but what they do need is sort of plants in general, if that makes sense. Ground beetles work because they sort of run around in between like the little plant stems on the ground level. So they need some sort of like flower cover. That way they can, avoid predation from like birds and as well as like, other insects and stuff.
That's actually a great lead into the next one, which is, have you seen birds occupying these flower strips, foraging or nesting? So thinking about what other species are a benefit here.
Yeah, so I've seen some sort of like ground nesting birds occupy the flower strips. We've also seen a little bit more like amphibians and reptiles within the flower strips. Sometimes the flower strips can be a little bit more humid than like the outside areas, just because the flowers are 2-3 feet tall. So I've noticed like some salamanders and like newts and frogs and stuff like that in there. So these flower strips not only benefit insects, but a lot of other organisms as well.
Okay, great. It looks like we're slowing down on the questions. We got one more here directed at Michael. So if anybody has any last minute burning questions, please put them in the Q&A now. Are there any challenges with the long-term management of the flower strip? So do you see the need for reseeding, or what does the long-term picture look like?
So long term, it can be sort of difficult to keep these flower strips going, but again, that's one of those things that it varies so much from farm to farm. For my project, we established about 15 of these flower strips back in 2019. And of those 15, I would say probably 6 or 7 established very well, and they're still going. And the other 6 or 7, either they didn't establish that first summer because we didn't have enough rain, or maybe the soil just drains too well and they don't really have adequate moisture. So 6 or 7 of those fields just had some sort of factor that it made it difficult. So sometimes you can just plant the seed and then you're good to go for several years. Sometimes it might not establish very well, but it just sort of depends.
All right. Okay. Well, I think that we've covered off all of the questions then. Thank you both. Great job. Thanks for answering all of our questions. Just to all of the participants, I think that that'll close our session for now, and we'll all be welcome to join in on the next panel discussion that's happening starting at 1:45. So be sure to tune back in then. Thanks.